Now that we're ready to start styling the base template, we're going to start with the navigation bar. So I will be using Bootstrap for this. I will use Bootstrap helper classes and utility functions throughout the tutorials as well. So we'll go ahead and get the links that we need in order to use it. So we'll be getting those from CDN.js. So we're going to be using version 5.2.3. So the first one we need is the Bootstrap min.js file. So we'll copy that link and paste it into the head of our base template. The second link that we need is the Bootstrap min.cs file. So we'll copy the link tag and paste that in as well. So we're going to add some block tags around these, okay? So the reason we want to put them in block tags is we might have CSS or JavaScript that's needed in other files, but not all files. So we want to reduce the amount of load times and things that we're actually loading. So because we'll be using Bootstrap on all pages, these will remain in the base, but by using the block tags, it will allow us to load both the files from the base, but also add new ones if we need to. So we'll go ahead with our curly brace percentage syntax and create a block extra CSS. Then close off our blocks and do the same for the JavaScript. We'll now head over to the Bootstrap documentation and look in the component section for a navbar. So the one I'm going to use is going to be a fairly small one, so we'll just copy this to the clipboard. Now do make sure that you're using the right version of the docs here, so we're looking for 5.2. Next, we're going to create a new folder inside the templates, and we're going to call this includes. So the reason for this is, as we want everything to be small and modular, we're going to split out some of the larger files, and then we will just include them within the base. That way our base template will not become too long. So inside the includes, we'll create a new file, and we'll call this one header.html. So we will open up with our header tag and paste in the navbar. Now within the base template, we need to include the header. So at the top of the body, we will use our curly brace percentage syntax and include keyword and a file path. So it's the includes folder with the header.html file. We'll also go ahead and update the title to Recipe Sharing and Meal Planner. So we'll go ahead and create another block tag. So this one will be the block title. This one will allow us to have a different title on each page. So our page titles should be unique and relevant to the pages that they are on. So for example, on the home page, we may want to have home. On the recipe page, we may want to have recipe and the name of the recipe, things like that. So from a search engine point of view, it also gives more information for those crawlers when people are searching. So we're going to go ahead and also link our style sheet. So we will add a link tag with a rel of style sheet and a href using our static keyword with the location of css/base.css. Don't forget to close the end tag. Just before we can use our style sheet and load our page, we need to actually load the static tag. So at the top of the page, we're going to use our curly brace percentage syntax, and we're just going to say load static. So this will be needed on any page that we try to access our static files from. So we'll talk about that a little bit in a few minutes time. So we'll go ahead and start up our application. And now we can see our navbar. So there is one other thing that I'm going to add into the navbar. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead back over to the Bootstrap website. So we want to also include a search bar into our navigation. Okay, so later on we'll be using that to filter and search for recipes. So we'll go ahead and copy out that form, and we'll go back to our header and add this in below the UL. So we'll just add a couple of comments in here so that we can separate our code. And we'll be adding a logo in here shortly. So the next thing we want to do is create our logo. So I will leave the file link in the repository should you want to download it, or you can add your own. So for this, we need to now create a static folder. So within our static folder, everything will live that is shared between all of our apps. So things like our images, our favicon, our CSS, and our JavaScript. So I'm going to create a couple of subfolders in here. So one will be CSS, and one will be images. So within the images, I will put the logo in. So now we want to replace the navbar for our image. So to do that, we will create an image tag, and we will give it an src. So for most front-end development, you would normally put a link in here, but with Django, we can load our images with the static keyword. So we will use the percentage curly brace syntax with the keyword static. Followed by static is then the location of our images. Okay, so we have logo.webp. So I have converted the file to WebP format. So WebP, for anybody that doesn't know, is a next-gen format. So generally the file sizes will be a lot smaller as they're more compressed. And then I have compressed the image with tiny PNG to make it the smallest file size possible. So the reason for doing that is every time your web page is loaded, all of these resources are being loaded. So we want to serve the files in the smallest possible format so that these are loaded quicker. So now we have our image, we also want to give it an alt tag. Okay, so alt tags are important for accessibility. So if for some reason the image didn't load, the alt tag would also be displayed. But for users with screen readers, they rely on the alt tag in order for the screen reader to describe what the image is seeing. So it should be descriptive to what it is. So I'm just going to call this recipe sharing and meal planner logo. So the last thing to do is we will add a class onto the image so that we can add some custom styling. Okay, so now before we'll be able to actually see this, because we are using this static keyword, we need to actually load static into our pages. So without this, we will encounter errors. The static files cannot be loaded. So if I just remove this for show, just so we can see, if I have no static and we'll open up our website, we can now see the error. So invalid block tag. Okay, so we have forgotten to load or register the tag. So we'll go back to our file and we'll go ahead and use the load static tag. So we will also add this to the base template as it will be used and needed within here. Okay, so once we have those static tags loaded, we need to go ahead and go to our settings.py file. So we need to add a couple more settings in here just so that our static files get loaded. So we need to add our static files directory or static root in order for it to know where our static files are loaded. So in here we can say static files dirs is equal to os.path.join, and we want to join the base dir with static. Okay, so we now have our loaded logo. So we're going to do a little bit of tidying up and CSS here so that we can get this to sit where we want. So we'll go on ahead back to our header. We'll close down this. We'll go back to our header and change these links. So we will keep the home at 1. So we will actually give this a URL of home. So you remember from earlier when we were creating our URL patterns, home is the name that we gave our URL pattern for the home. So that will allow us to load the home page. So we'll replace features with recipes, and we will also add another link for new. Okay, so new later will be to enable us to create our recipe. So we'll remove the final nav item as we won't be using that one, and we will make a few changes to the form. So we will change the button class here to primary, as the primary color is the blue we will be using throughout. So in our CSS folder, we'll now go ahead and create our base.css. So I'm going to add in a comment so that I can put my header. I'm going to go ahead and import some fonts, and we're going to create some root variables. So I am using the Garamond and Roboto fonts, so I have gotten these from Google Fonts. You're welcome to change those up or use whichever ones you want. There will be a link to Google Fonts in the description. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create some root variables. So root variables will enable us to name our variables and set them, and then we can reuse them throughout. So imagine if we were adding a background color of white to everything and having to type, hash FFF everywhere, then if we wanted to change that shade of white, we would have to search through and we'd have to find quite a lot of them and replace. So by creating root variables, I could just call it white, and then I would use that in my CSS rule. So I would only actually have to come back once then and just change it in that one place, and that in turn would change my color of white everywhere. So I'm going to create some fonts variables, and I will be creating some colors. So the first font is going to be our title, so we have a double dash syntax to name it. So this one is going to be EB Garamond and a backup font of serif. And the second one is going to be our main font for the website, so we will have main font, and this one will be Roboto with a backup of serif. So I am going to copy and paste in some color schemes here, so if you need to pause the video to get them out. So I'm going to have a background which is going to be, as it says, a background in places. I will have a blue, which is going to be the equivalent to the primary class of Bootstrap, as I will be using that blue throughout. We will have a black, an off-white, a pure white, and an orange variable. So the last root variables that I want are to have my borders and my box shadows. So I just call this utils. So for our cards and things later on, we'll be adding a box shadow and it will just be the same on all. So instead of having to constantly write out that syntax, we can just create a variable. So we'll have a small box shadow, 1 pixels, -1 pixels, 7 pixels, 0, and the color we use is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we will have a border class, which will be 1 pixel solid and 30. So now that we have our root variables, we're ready to go ahead and start styling our header. So if we go back to the header file for a second, we have lots of classes that have already been applied by Bootstrap. So they are good to get going, but we might want to override a few of them. So as you can see, like we'll have our outer navbar, we have container fluid, nav item and link. So just to add a touch of styling on the top of these, we are going to add some custom styling. So we'll start by targeting the navbar, and we will give this a background color of our root variables. So we can do this by saying var, and then we give it the name of the variable, which was the off-white. And we will also give it a box shadow, and that will be our small box shadow. Next, we want to style the nav links. So we'll have a .nav link. So the reason I can't just do nav link is because Bootstrap styling will override it, so we need to be a little bit more specific. So we'll go ahead and give that a color of black. We are then going to target our image. So we are targeting the image itself with a class of logo, and I'm going to give that a width of 18.75 rem. And we're going to add some styling around the main page. So we're going to add some styling onto the HTML on the body. So we're going to give these a height of 100%. So one thing that we want is when we have our footer, we want it always to be at the bottom of the page. So a way to do that is to give our page a height, our body some styling, and we will also target our main tag and our footer in order to make sure that regardless of whether there's enough content on the page, that our footer will stay at the bottom. So it's one of the things I do first. I know technically we don't have a footer yet, but I like to get it done at the beginning. So we'll go ahead then and target the body. So we're going to give this display flex. We're going to give it a flex direction of column so that everything within the body is stacked. And we're going to set the font family equals to our main font. We'll then go ahead and we will target all of our headings because we want our title font on those. So we will target all versions of headings. And we will give those a font family of title. We will then target our main tag and we will give this flex 10 auto and a background color of white. The last thing then is we will add in our footer class for later. So with this one, we're not actually targeting the class, we're targeting the tag itself, and we're just going to give that a flex shrink of 0 so that once that is created, it will stay at the bottom. So the last thing I want to do then is add some more Bootstrap classes inline to enable our search form to sit at the right place. So within our UL class for our navbar, we're going to go ahead and give that a class of ME auto, so that means margin end auto. We're going to give it a margin bottom of 2. And we're going to go ahead then and open our live site. Now our CSS should be looking good and we are ready to start the footer.